पांडुरंग विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
पांडुरंग विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
पुरंदर विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
पुरंदर विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
हरी नारायण भजो नारायण
हरी नारायण भजो नारायण
हरी नारायण भजो नारायण
हरि नारायण भजो नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरि नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरि नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरि नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरि नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरि नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरी नारायण
विठ्ठल विठ्ठल विठ्ठले हरि नारायण
हरी नारायण भजो नारायण
हरि नारायण भजो नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
सत्य नारायण
सत्य नारायण
सत्य नारायण
सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
साई नारायण सत्य नारायण
विठ्ठला हरी विठ्ठला. When we do the Kirtan, please clap along with us. When you clap, it stimulates all the circulation in your whole body. So clap along with us and sing along with us as well. Okay? Om Hari Om Hari Om Bhajo Re Sada Om Hari Om Hari Om
Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha.
Akhanda mandalakaram vyaptam yena characharam tatpadam darshitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Tasmai Shri Shri Sadguru Dev ki Jai.
Welcome to Satsang, and thank you so much for the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Kirtan. You know, we refer to it in English as music, singing. But in Sanskrit, Bhakti Yoga is something completely different. I mean, it includes being channeled through music, but it's actually a path that opens our hearts, that connects us to the divine in love. So devotional chanting, this Kirtan, is not just, musical interlude sort of stuff. It's actually that which opens our hearts and brings us into that connection with the divine. We're given three paths, three possible paths. I mean, there's obviously more, but in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives us three paths to the divine. Jnana Yoga, the path of wisdom, knowledge. Karma Yoga, the path of using every action as a way to connect with the divine. And Bhakti Yoga, the path of love and devotion. And for so many people, Bhakti Yoga is the easiest path. I mean, they're all beautiful. They all get you there. They're all powerful, and we all should try to use all three of them to be wise, to be introspective, to be deep, to be thoughtful, to study. But the path of Jnana Yoga can so subtly become a path of one's own ego around how much I know, what I can recite, what I've learned, look how smart I am. And it can if we're not really careful, it can pull us out of connection, out of the heart, and into the head through convincing us that somehow reading something or memorizing it is the equivalent of experiencing it. And karma yoga is the path that so many of us are deeply engaged in. It's an incredibly powerful path. Every minute and every moment, we get to use our action as a way of getting closer to God. But again, it's a path into which some ego can creep. I am the one, I'm the doer. Look at all that I did today. Look at how many people I fed. Look at what I did. Some ego can creep in very subtly, but very insidiously. Also in this path of karma yoga, we have to be really careful. It's an incredibly powerful path. But it requires us to be really sharp in making sure that our ego is not creeping in as the doer of the action. But in Bhakti Yoga, there's much less of a tendency for the ego to creep in. Because in Bhakti Yoga, we are just the lover of the divine. Bhakti Yoga is just all about this open-hearted love and connection and devotion. And so for a lot of people, it's the fastest path, the most easily accessible path to that divine. So thank you so much for opening our hearts and catalyzing that path of love for God. Starting with a question that has come in advance, and then we'll open it up to any questions that anyone here might have. I have a strong calling to serve God. Should I do it or should I ignore it? Why in the world would you ignore a strong and divine calling? Absolutely, you should do it. But here's the beautiful thing. Serving God can take many, many forms, because all of the creation, all of the human beings, all of the natural world, all of the species, everything in the universe is creation, created of the Creator. So we believe in the Hindu tradition that the creation is sacred because it's pervaded by the divine, that it is divine. And so serving God doesn't mean I need to clean the floors of the temple every day. Serving God doesn't mean I need to be the one performing the puja in the temple. Serving God could be anything. It could be feeding people. It could be raising money for the organization that feeds people. It could be designing the website of the organization that feeds the people. It could be clothing people. It could be educating them. It could be giving them opportunities. It could be planting trees. It could be driving the car that the people who do the tree plantation go to do their tree plantation in. It could be the guy or the gal who maintains the database of where the trees have been planted. Everything that we do can be a way of serving God, as long as it's a way that we are offering of ourselves, of our time, of our energy, of our skills to the creation. And in a way where we're not looking for anything back other than the opportunity to serve. That it's not a bargain, it's not a contract, it's not, I'll do this for you, you do this for me. But in that case, any service can be service of God. So, asked by Asha. So Asha, do not ignore it. By all means, listen to it. Follow it. And use every moment and every opportunity you have to serve God. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful calling. Questions? Yes.
Namaskaram. My question to you is that if the entire creation is so sacred, and we know that we have to really serve the entire creation, now the issue is that we have limited number of realized beings, such as yourself. We have also another being of rational being, what you described yesterday. But the majority is beyond that. And what we have seen around us is in terms of environment degradation, climate change, destruction of biodiversity, water, soil, everything, So time is really running out.
Yes.
So how do we go beyond the rational beings, the realized beings, and to ensure that the other beings are really catered to and explained in as quickly as possible? Thank you.
Beautiful. This is where mass awareness is so important. It's where everyone has to become awakened and inspired. There's two pieces. There's the real and there's the ideal. So the ideal says we're all going to become realized beings. We're all going to wake up. We're all going to raise our consciousness and start living as conscious beings, as awake beings, as one with each other, with the earth. And that's beautiful, and we all should hold that as an ideal, and we certainly should work to make sure that we are on a path of unfolding to get closer and closer to our true realization or awakening or whatever word you want to use for it. It doesn't matter, but that in which we realize the truth of who we are and the connection of that with all. But the reality of the situation, as you say, is that there are a huge number of people, a huge percentage rather, who are taking things in the other direction. And we have to look at the real and acknowledge the real while trying to move toward the ideal. It doesn't do us any good to ignore the reality. And this is where it's so important for everyone. Whether they are God realized or not, you don't have to be God realized to know that if you don't have clean water to drink, you're going to get sick. You don't have to be God realized to know that polluted air makes us sick. You don't have to be realized to know the importance of trees and soil and water. You just have to be mildly, really mildly intelligent. But you also have to be inspired. And this is where it's so important for all of us to do our part and to inspire others. And that's what we're doing. That's what we all keep doing. And not to look at the others and to finger point and to criticize, why are they not doing their part? Why do we have to do everything? But to take it as a spiritual path. To understand that every blade of grass, every drop of water, every flower is sacred. There's that beautiful story of the boy walking down the beach where some high tide had brought in so many of the fish onto the beach, and then the tide had receded and now it was low tide, but there were all of these starfish washed up on the shore, right? And the little boy is picking up the starfish one by one, throwing them back into the water. And a man walks up to him and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm throwing the starfish back in the water, or they're gonna die out here." And the man says, "There must be thousands of them. This huge high tide brought them all in. There must be thousands. It's going to be dark in an hour. You got to go home for dinner. You can't make much of a dent. What you're doing is not going to make much of a difference. Why are you even bothering?" And the boy looked at him and he pointed to the starfish in his hand and he said, "Makes a difference to this one." Threw it in the water. And I love that story because that's what it's about. We look out and we see the thousands and thousands of them metaphorically. We look out at the situation in the world and we say, "My God, forget it. Go home for dinner. There's nothing I can do." But really what we need is that faith and that love and that innocence and that purity and that clarity that the little boy had. Of knowing, all right, he didn't survey the beach and say, "Can I get this all done before dinner or not?" He saw a problem and started addressing it. And whether it's picking up trash in our town, whether it's cleaning the river in our town, whether it's riding our bike instead of driving a car, whether it's going vegetarian, starting to live consciously, shop, eat, dress consciously. We do it, not because it's going to fix climate change entirely, and that too before dinner, but because it makes a difference, as much as we all can do. And if we all do that, enlightened or not, realized or not, even intelligent or not. The boy was not some super intelligent, wise being. He was a kid. But he had exactly what was needed, which was the awareness. This is in front of me. It is a problem. I can help it. And he did. And that's what's needed. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for your beautiful and inspiring memoir. It was so brave, and I'm grateful. Secondly, I just wanted to ask the question of how everybody living in different parts of the world, different jobs, different experiences, how do we follow the path of love, or how do we love best in the world?
Beautiful. Love is one of my favorite topics. So, I was raised in the Jewish tradition. I'm now, as you can tell, a practicing Hindu. And yet, one of the teachings of love that has always really stuck with me is Jesus Christ's teaching about love thy neighbor as thyself. And it's been something that I've done a lot of thinking about because as deeply spiritual as I am, I'm also a scientist at heart. My academic background is science. I love science. I've got a very scientific, rational mind. And so my mind says, well, what does that mean? And I've asked a lot of both just Christian devotees, believers, as well as Christian leaders. Did he ever clarify how far the neighbor was? Like, did he say next door neighbor? 5-block radius? The people on your street? I mean, did he give any clarifying information about who qualified as a neighbor? And everyone I've always asked says no. Now that led my brain to think, well, okay. I mean, if I look, before moving to the ashram, if I look at every place I've ever lived, every street I've ever lived on, from the time I was growing up, I didn't even know the name of everyone on my street. And maybe you knew the people across the street, maybe you knew the ones right next door. But I didn't even know the names of everyone on my street, let alone be able to actually love them. And then, if we haven't been given any kind of radius, then it's not only my street. I mean, maybe he means, the whole zip code. Who knows what he meant? And so it boggled my scientific mind. And I finally came to the awareness that there's actually only one way to do it. Because a lot of people, when I would talk about this, would say, well, he didn't mean it literally. But that's scripture. People who are devoted, practicing Christians believe this is the word of God. We can't just dismiss it as, well, he was just, being kind of vague. Scripture is scripture. And so I realized that the only way that you actually could do what he had instructed people to do, which presumably meant love everyone, because if there's no place that a border can be drawn, it could presumably be the world is your neighbor. That the only way to do it was to love God and realize that everyone was simply a manifestation of, a reflection of that divine. In the same way that if you think about a person you love, now think about every single picture of them you've ever seen. Some may be flattering pictures, some may be non-flattering pictures, but every picture of them, when you look at it, flattering or unflattering, is going to fill your heart with love because it reminds you of the person you love whose picture it is. Whether they've got a Halloween costume on or not. Fully clothed, naked, asleep, awake, hair brushed, not brushed, doesn't matter. You love the being whose picture it is. So every picture you see is going to inspire love in your heart. And I realized, I think that's the only way to do it, is to actually love God by any name, by any form, in any tradition, an actual religion or just a spiritual experience, it doesn't matter. But however you are able to connect to that divine, to love the divine so much that you are able to love every single manifestation of, reflection of that divine, because you see the divine in them. And yeah, some are going to be, flattering images. Some are going to be not so flattering images. Some are going to be some that you think, my God, really? That's you? Right? You ever see a picture of a loved one, you say, from when they were young? Really? No. But you're going to love the picture eventually anyway, once you realize, oh, yeah. So in the same way that we have such a hard time sometimes seeing the divine in others, it's really? You in there? And you just have to look a little harder. But to be able to actually experience that love for all, whether it's a human, whether it's a blade of grass, whether it's an animal, because we love the divine, we therefore are able to love all. And I think that that's the greatest calling to love. Other questions? Yes.
Hello. My question is that we say we love divine and divine is quite kind to us. But in reality what we find is that this world is very cruel. So how come divine has created such a cruel world?
So, the divine did not create a cruel world. Let's look at nature before we come to humans. Now, I assume everyone in here has at some point in their life, maybe even just on an airplane, seen a National Geographic or Discovery Channel film in which you see some beautiful herd of zebras or wildebeest or whatever they may be going through the African plains, and then suddenly there's the tiger or there's the lion, right? And it starts to hunt its prey, and instinctively, we're always rooting for the zebras, right? The lion finally pounces, and in us we feel, oh, no, and you want somehow that the zebra should get away. And yet, we all understand, well, the lion's got to eat too. This is how the natural world works. If every zebra got away, the poor lion would die. So I don't take that as cruelty. I take that as a natural cycle of life, that on some level we are eaters and we are food. And that's a cycle. To me, that's not cruelty. And I don't think that's what you meant either, but it's important to just begin there, because sometimes you do see these videos and you always feel like, oh my God, that awful lion. when actually the lion's just doing what lions do, which is to have to eat. But then we come to humans. Now, humans are the only species that actually harms another for no reason that benefits its own survival. So everything else in nature that harms for its own survival, either because I need to eat you, or because you are threatening me in some way. So if you go hiking and you accidentally happen to walk between a mama bear and her bear cub, you might find yourself getting attacked. Not because the bear is cruel, but because you've triggered a protective response in that mama bear to protect her cub. But we are the only species that attacks for things that have absolutely nothing to do with our physical survival. Things that have only to do with our ego survival. Right? I mean, somebody steals your parking spot. Hear stories. Somebody pulls out a gun and blows the guy's brains out for cutting in front of him on a freeway or stealing his parking spot. That's not survival. That's ego. Now, when you look at what we as humans do, either in fits of rage and unconsciousness, like killing someone for stealing my parking spot, or in the calculated violence against certain races, certain religions, against women in far too many places, against people who are different from us in so many ways. Or the violence that we are doing to Mother Earth. This is not cruelty that God has created in us. We don't come into the world cruel. I've got a background in psychology, and if you see a child who's killing lizards or, hurting the family cat or dog or their baby brother or sister, this is a problem. Nobody ever says, oh yeah, well that's normal. That's a huge red flag that this kid has got serious problems and needs help. We do not come into this world cruel. We learn it. We learn it because the only mistake that God might have made, if we allow ourselves for a moment to think that it's not all perfect, I do believe it's all perfect, but just for a moment, the only mistake that we could say that God maybe made was this whole free will business. Maybe God thought that we were going to handle free will much better than we have. But we've been created with this thing called free will. And in free will, we make choices. We make decisions. And we can make them rooted in truth, in love, in compassion. Or we can make them rooted in ignorance and ego. And that's up to us. So the cruelty is not that God has created a cruel world. It's that far too many of us are choosing to align ourselves in ignorance with ego than with truth. And hence you get cruelty. Because if I've aligned myself with this false self, just the physical body and how much money it makes and what its role in society is, how high it is on the ladder, corporate ladder, social ladder, whatever it may be, well then I'm going to do whatever I need to do to have the most money, to be as high as I can on the ladder, to push others away. If I align with my ego, then a threat to the ego becomes survival. In the same way that the mama bear harms you in the protection of her child, if I align myself with my ego and you hurt my ego, well, that's when I start thinking things like, I'll show you. I'm going to get my revenge. We'll see who you think you are. Because, see, my ego has then become as precious as the mama bear's child. My ego has become then my survival. It is me. Its survival is my survival. And hence we become cruel. We also become miserable, by the way. People who are cruel are also by nature miserable. And so it's not just that we bring cruelty onto the world. It's that we live in misery. Because when we align with false self, it's like if you keep eating junk food, eventually you are going to get sick. You're not going to feel well. As you lie down to go to sleep, as you wake up in the morning, the body is going to be like, oh my God, what have I put in it? Tongue may have loved it while it was going in, but it's wreaking havoc on your body. And in the same way, the more we fill ourselves with junk thoughts and junk values and junk goals, the sicker we become in our hearts. And again, we may not notice it as we're moving through our day, bringing cruelty and negativity and competition and whatnot to everyone. But at the end of the day, when we lie down to go to sleep, when we wake up in the morning, you feel it. You feel that misery in the heart, like you feel it in the stomach from the junk food. So it's up to us. Do we want to keep aligning ourselves, filling ourselves with junk? That make us sick in the heart? That make us go against the truth of who we are and become cruel to others who are ourselves? Or do we want to align ourselves with healthy values, healthy decisions, spiritually healthy, emotionally healthy? And those then end up not only making us feel much better, giving us the joy that we're looking for, the peace we're looking for, but we then become assets to Mother Earth rather than viruses to Mother Earth. But it's not God's fault, unless you consider that this gift of free will was perhaps not so smart. You know, it's like parents give their kids something sometimes that they think the kid is old enough to know what to do with, and then they discover the child is not, and so they confiscate it. I wonder sometimes why God doesn't just confiscate this free will thing. But I think it's because the whole point is that we need to use our free will to wake up to the truth. That's the whole point. But it's not God's fault. It's our fault for aligning ourselves with ignorance. And so we become cruel. This is why we need more satsang, more spiritual practice, more meditation, more prayer, more karma yoga and bhakti yoga and jnana yoga. It's why we need more love. Because it feels so good. It feels so much better to hug someone than to hurt them. Not just in the mind that says, oh, this is the right thing and that's the wrong thing, but if you just think back on your life, times that we've all been cruel to another, even on a minor level, it feels horrible. Especially in retrospect. And then you think about those times that you've been loving to another, and it feels so good. So we have to all choose love. When we choose love, we find it inside, we find the joy inside, and we stop this pandemic of cruelty and violence. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your evenings. There will not be satsang tomorrow. We'll come back day after tomorrow. Tomorrow evening I will be in Dehradun at a program with the President of India who's coming to our state tomorrow. So I'll be in Dehradun there with the beautiful privilege of being with her. India now has this beautifully dynamic woman from the lower castes, from the lower classes, from the lower section of society who's just been brought in as president of the nation. And she's an incredible, incredible embodiment of that. That beautiful divine power of the divine feminine. And it's so beautiful to now have her at this beautiful guiding light of the nation. So it'll be a beautiful privilege to be with her tomorrow, but I'll miss being with you all in satsang, and I will see you all again on the day after tomorrow, on the 9th.